Welcome to Old Man Blerd. Hi, I'm John, and along with my friend Terrance, we make up a pair of lifelong geeks who happen to be black, over 50, but are certainly nerds first and foremost. The Alpha Geek and the Omega Freak. And we welcome everyone. And by everyone, we mean nerds, blerds, and bleaks, cosplayers and role players, geeks and freaks, Marvel zombies and distinguished competitors, Trekkies, Star Warriors, Batmaniacs, and Spider fans, Warhams, Whovians, AFOLs, adult fans of Legos, Tolkienites, Weeaboos, Supernatural hunters and otakus, Ava geeks, bro stars and sistars, Pokemon trainers, Potterheads, bronies, Whovians, browncoats and Scoobies, and all nerd properties in between. Because we are over 50, we've seen a thing or two and have experience, long experience, with a lot of these properties. So thank you for listening to Old Man Blerd.
Hello.
Hello, sir. How are you?
I'm doing fine. Long time no see.
Oh, well, our life is never boring.
No. Yeah, it has been a bit. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, anyone out there in the world of Cyberland who actually is compassionate enough and understanding enough and patient enough to listen to us. Welcome to Old Man Blerd, where two middle-aged, I guess is black nerds reminisce, commiserate, and complain and discuss all of the nerd topics of all the nerdy things. So it's been a bit. I think most of us out in the world of Nerdland have been doing cons. Con season is just wrapping up.
Not really. They're trying to make it year round now.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. So that is fair. But that's where I have been of late for the last few weeks. I did NDK. I did the Colorado Festival of Horror, where we had Kurt and I had a little horror entry named 3, which you can see on the That's So Quantum channel. What else? Was Pop Culture Con in the last time that we
it was the Pinball Showdown was also one that was that same weekend.
Oh,
It's your
okay.
horror thing. There's the Utah one. The only reason I mentioned is because the next state over. That was this
Sure.
weekend. Then we have the Munster Mash is next month, as in October.
Oh, okay. Oh, I think there was also the Telluride Horror Festival, but we didn't enter our movie into that our short film into that because it was just a bit too expensive.
I used to
Telluride.
think about the Munster Mash. We should do that one too.
Yeah, tis the season for horror. For sure. I've been probably doing I guess we should segue before we get into the topic of cons, the pros and cons of cons. What nerdy thing have you been up to aside from cons in the last few weeks?
Other than cons, really not too much, just watching my little shows like we both do, or reading or whatever else, just kind of low key.
That's fair.
I mean, I went to see my daughter last week. My son shocked me by the fact he went to a con.
Oh, what
It's
con did you go to?
The Tucson con. They had Doug Jones there.
Doug Jones, refresh my memory.
He plays Bill in Hocus Pocus.
Oh, okay.
He's basically the modern Lon Chaney Sr.
Oh, okay.
He adapts to play all sorts of different parts.
Nice. I have to confess, much to my daughter's chagrin, I've never seen Hocus Pocus. It's like her all-time favorite movie. She has the Funko Pops, all the things, and I've never watched it.
I was actually shocked that Spirit actually had a Funko Pop of a semi-disturbing scene from Killer Clowns from Outer Space.
Oh goodness. Yeah, I think Funko they're slowly taking over the world. If there is a property that any more than two people have seen, Funko is on it.
Yeah, and you can and can't like it because you know what I mean. It's like as many people we know have said, I can't go down that rabbit hole.
Well,
But
yeah.
it's not so much a rabbit hole as that one scene or that one character, and then you cut yourself off because you're really not interested in anything beyond that.
Well, I sort of went down that hole. I only, as far as superhero stuff, I only get Spider-Man ones.
You see what I mean? So
But
you cut yourself off.
I did cut myself up, but I did get some D&D stuff. I didn't get Vecna, but I got the Iliath, the Mind Flayer.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I got Strahd. I got that.
Mm-hmm.
Got a lot of Doctor Who ones, I have to confess. Got got a got a lot of Doctor Who ones. The Dalek, the Weeping Angels, Cybermen, a
Mm-hmm.
few of the Doctors. So yeah, and the TARDIS. So yeah, yeah. I mean, you do have to put limits on yourself, though. I think.
Yeah, because I think if you try to collect that, I think that'd be the worst thing in the world versus comics because they're just big enough; they'll take up more space in their own way.
Yes, they
And then
absolutely
to
will.
top it off, they have miniature ones now that just came out this year.
Mm-hmm.
They look like little ornaments you put on a tree.
It's true. Well, because they just know. I mean, I think it started off like, I mean, was it mostly video games? I'm not sure, but they figured out that if anybody cults out on anything, th- if they make a Funko Pop of it, that it's smart. But then they just got too saturated because then I was seeing the Eternals movie Funko Pops and and stuff that they're like, oh, we'll give it away here. It's $5 because nobody wants that stuff. Nobody wants the Eternals movie Funko Pops or some miscellaneous third tier character in any number of Marvel movies. It's like, no, no, no.
Well, you're absolutely correct, but let's also talk about the upside, even though it's not our subject today, of Funko Pops. Is
Mm-hmm.
that every now and then you will see a pop culture game that would not exist if it wasn't Funko.
Yeah, that's true.
Because I mean, they have a Jaws game, even though Jaws has three games technically. It has the Milton Bradley game. Then they had another game that came out that was essentially the same, but they changed the concept because there's only so much you could do with a shark.
Sure.
And and then they have the Funko Pop, and then they have a Batman game, and they have a Golden Girls game. You see where I'm going with this?
Now, see,
They
that's
have,
the I did get the Golden Girls Funkos for my wife, who loves the Golden Girls. So
but you get my point. Is that it's like you would never see a Golden Girls game again beyond Milton Bradley because they used to do any TV game. Love Boat.
sure, sure, a Love Boat game, a Fantasy Island game that checks out. Yeah,
Yeah.
Funko is doing to collectibles and nerd culture what probably Milton Bradley used to do with TV shows and everything else. It was like, oh, it's the Banana Splits game and the Banana Splits doll and the Laugh Olympics toys and yeah.
Well, see, Milton Bradley did the games. It was Kenner that did any toy. I
That's
mean, crying
true.
out loud, Duke, what was actually one of my favorite toys. The idea of an adventure dog like Lassie, except that you had your own. But there
I
are some
thought
things you had to go, okay, this dog, when you look back as a writer, even though I say I would just kind of scribble, you know, you have to say, okay, so we have a genetically enhanced intelligent dog that's made to be a rescue people.
sure.
That is, that's how you explain it.
Sure. Well, I'm sure there's probably a Lassie Funko Pop. I mean, pretty much at this point, if you're into it, there's a Funko Pop for sure. Um, I'm trying to think of the nerd stuff that I've been up to lately. Playing Space Marines. I haven't seen
Hmm.
any Warhammer Funko Pops yet, but I think that
Hmm.
I feel like Warhammer really controls its intellectual property. They're like, nah, if there's gonna be something, if we're gonna release miniatures, it's gonna be a Warhammer TM kind of product. They're not going to let their IP get out to Funko, I don't think. I'd buy,
Well, I think it's
probably.
similar to the Godzilla. I didn't know about this until while we've been apart. There is a
Mm-hmm.
Godzilla room. The
Uh,
Godzilla room is at Toho, and basically they're the ones who, kind of like George Lucas had years ago when he had the rights to Star Wars.
mm-hmm.
He had basically a lore master who helped him keep things straight.
Huh.
And the Godzilla room is basically okay. Godzilla can never talk. Godzilla can never completely die. He can use 90%, and oh my God, he's got to go heal up. But he can never completely die. And I forgot there's one other. Oh, he can't be eating humans.
He can't, yeah, he
That
can't eat humans. Yeah, that's probably good, because if they had him eating humans, I think some of the fandom would go away. But there is a Funko Pop for Godzilla, but it is super new. Like, it is the last movie with King Kong new. I have
right.
never seen a Godzilla Funko outside of that Godzilla King Kong. I have the metal fist King Kong Funko.
Mm.
But yeah, I guess it gets a little sloppy. But so playing Warhammer Space Marine, what's sad to me is I've just started to look into sort of Reddit stuff for Warhammer, and I guess there's like a metric ton of people that really think Warhammer is super fascist, and that people that like it are fascist. And I am absolutely not a fascist, so I
Oh,
don't.
I can attest to that, Your Honor. If anyone's not fascist, it's John. I'm more
Yes,
fascist than John. I
yeah.
totally admit.
I'm just a hair away from being a democratic socialist, I think. But yeah, there's apparently, I guess there's people for that somehow think that
But see,
there are
John,
good
this is
guys in Warhammer, and there aren't. If you are looking at Warhammer and think there are any good guys, you are really misinterpreting Warhammer.
but see, you understand, John. Lot of people, number one, they're not like us from the '80s.
Sure,
And what I mean by that, in the '80s, especially the '80s, was the era of black and white toys. There was a
sure,
good guy and there was a bad guy. That
sure,
was it.
sure.
Yeah. Towards the mid '80s, I think it was Inhumanoids was the first one that was probably the closest to a true horror cartoon.
Mm-hmm.
Before that was Johnny Quest. You know, you didn't
Yeah,
see the death, but you knew it sucked to be you. You never saw. You just knew. Yep, they were going to die.
yeah.
But
But
my point with this is that we are so full of opinion, and that's a good thing. But the bad thing is a lot of people they can sit up there talk out of their anal cavity without knowing what they're talking about.
yeah, clearly. Well, but I think what has happened is now that everything has just been swallowed by culture war, um, there are people that they look very superficially at Warhammer, and they're like, "Oh, this is, these are fascists. So clearly, if you're talking about fascists, that means you like them." And it's like, no.
Well, yeah. One of my favorite role playing games, though I can't find out how to play it because I use it as a supplement, is Reichstar. And
Sure,
Reichstar was a self-contained game. It had like one or two supplements because it really didn't take off because its premise was very straightforward. Hitler won,
okay.
and it takes place in the 24th century.
Mm-hmm.
Jews are a myth. Blacks have facial tattoos, especially if they're mulatto. Blah blah blah. You know, and Hitler was a figurehead that was killed off about 10 years after the war. But my point is, I took it from the point of view that your job now is to be the rising sun
Mm-hmm.
to help bring it back down,
Oh,
to
okay.
make Hitler and them lose. Even
Sure.
though they won and they ran quite a ways, you understand, just be that rebel, be the French Revolution as it was during World War II.
Yeah,
You
I
know,
I think that well, because a lot of fantasy gaming and war gaming, whether it be D&D or Warhammer or Gamma World or any of the various sort of board game role playing games things, they ended up being mostly done by what people would call incels now, which, really were just, guys that might have had some social awkwardness, met other guys that had maybe some social awkwardness and kind of culted out on these games. And because the modern person playing those games gets, sort of red pilled into being a fascist by being online for an hour. 30, 40, 50 years ago, it was just dudes that just found interesting high concept games entertaining.
Oh,
And
exactly.
so,
Because you know, one of the things is that they forget that most gamers, they either make us very in, inept,
mhm,
which some of us are, including me, as far as social skills, but they make us very inept, but they don't include desire to try to fit.
sure.
You know, they instead put the label of, okay, that's just the way I am, which a lot of people, if you notice now, even the ones that are popular in pop culture, they say
Mhm,
that's just the way they am, and they are totally not right.
sure.
I mean, they're just what they're doing is wouldn't be liked 100 years ago. Forget about sex or race; it just wouldn't
Mhm,
be tolerated.
sure.
And and yet they'll do it, and they'll say, "Well, that's just the way I am," and it loses the flavor when it comes to like gaming or all that other stuff. Because, like you said, you're condemned. We're condemned as a gamer. You know, we're condemned if you like a certain comic book. Like somebody was telling me how comics are dying, and comics are going through a slow death,
Sure.
but comics aren't going to go away.
No,
They're
and
going
those
to just be a
properties,
niche.
those intellectual properties aren't going to go away either. They're just
Yeah, it's just going to be a niche.
it'll
It's
just be
like Swans I read today, the delivery first delivery service of food.
mhm.
Their last day is November.
Hmm.
They've been around for almost 100 years. It's like, well, that's kind of sad. That's where off the subject. I know totally not pop culture, but that's
Sure.
where some of those delivery services need to go grab them because I would find it interesting that we have about 1,000 businesses that have been around longer than 300 years in the entire world,
Sure.
and over 70% of them are in Japan.
Mhm.
And that's because they embrace the legacy and the value of what was attempted to be done.
Yeah,
And versus here, where we go, okay, that was nice, it's my turn now. And
sure.
where I'm going with it, it's the same thing with gaming. We could say D&D is Randall's course. We could say role-playing games are Randall's course. But as long as you aren't included, as long as you need a social outlet or connection, they're going to be around.
Yeah, it's true. Well, I think that what happens, I just was listening to a podcast today, and what it was talking about is that one of the things that's really exploding right now in terms of on YouTube is Generation Z. These are the, children of the millennials, I guess, or, of the younger
Our
side,
grandkids or great grandkids.
sure, or younger, Gen X children of Gen Xers, are super into watching like old videos of high schoolers in the 80s.
Ah,
like they're just interested in watching them go to their lockers with their mullets and their
big
jean
hair.
jackets and those shoulder pads, and I'm like, that's a thing that they want to watch. And if you think about it, all of
It
the
makes
real
perfect sense.
it makes perfect sense. And it's also, if you think about some of the more popular intellectual properties right now, they're all sort of retro facing. I mean, Stranger Things is, you know, I, there's plenty of
The flagship of
inaccuracies.
that.
Yeah,
It's the
there's plenty
flagship
of
of that.
inaccuracies that I see in Stranger Things. I'm like, nope, that didn't happen that way. That sort of happened that way. Oh, that totally happened that way. There were things in it that I did feel that way about Stranger Things. But Stranger Things is this big love letter to 1980s culture, and every other slasher film that I see now takes place in the 1980s. Trying to recapture that sort of the first Jason, first Halloween kind of vibe, late 70s, early 80s. And yeah, it seems like there's this weird nostalgia for the 1980s. And
Well,
so even comic books at some point will go through that. I never would have thought in a million years. I had tons of LPs at one point. I would have never thought LPs would come back. I used to buy LPs in the 90s for $2, $3 used. Now those same LPs are like hundreds of dollars, and if you buy it new with a repressing, it's $30. $30 to listen to Abbey Road on vinyl. And so I eventually comic books will probably go through a thing like that. So probably with Bronze Age stuff, because Silver Age stuff will be too expensive. But
Well, I think it would happen to a degree for the sure reason that we have discussed many times before. And about every 3 to 4 months, it happens where either a streaming service or a music service shuts down, does something atrocious. I mean, the best example was uh, Psycho. Psycho was about 2 weeks ago. I forgot what it was on. I think it was on Netflix. And I hadn't seen it. I was reading the article, but to the point, they had changed the last ending and superimposed the Big Bang Theory ending of them seeing the ending on it.
Oh, geez.
So in other words, what they were doing is they were advertising Big Bang Theory to the movie.
Huh.
Patton Oswalt, of course, went off. He's a geek.
Old
He
school.
was the biggest what?
Gen X geek, yeah, old school.
And my point with this,
popular.
what he was saying was, this is why we go to tangible, and that's what I've always said. No one cares about tangible other than toys or physical board games. But what they care about is the agency and the autonomy of being able to choose what they did and didn't watch. The new thing now is either they control what we see, or they flood it with what we see. I mean, you see it on the free channels on some of the television TVs you buy. They have their own little stations, Wi-Fi stations, and you are flooded with what you like, but you still don't have a choice. You know what I mean? Like my father, we spent one day just watching Tiny House Nation.
Sure.
But that doesn't mean that's what we want to watch all the time.
Sure.
And that's what they've taken away. And the fact they did that to Psycho, what other things you're going to see? Because I mean, we all have heard about, like we mentioned before, Revenge of the Nerds. We have heard about how they would call each other the F word in some of the 80s movies, or they would question someone's sexuality again in the 80s movies. And what Bill Maher has said is something that this generation, as in those younger than us as a whole, we can kind of accept because we were there. And that is, it was a different time.
Yeah. Well,
and that's the best way to put it. It was a different time. I mean, how many times that we saw, and this is not to get too deep into the subject, but how many times we saw on the Jerry Springer show, 80s, 90s, them talking about how, you have a Klan member sit up there and hate our hue until he got a grandchild that was half our hue.
Sure. Sure. It's like it just sort of changes with the times. I mean, the average 80s comedy has at least one homophobic reference, and arguably
in the season, if not the whole series.
Yeah, well, and I'm talking about the movies, but yeah, in the series is all the time. But in the movies, at least one homophobic reference, and usually some form of sexual assault, date rape, inappropriate sexual touching, something. Every single one. And usually some weird stereotyping that maybe played for irony. I think obviously in Blazing Saddles, that was the point, is making fun of those things.
Totally.
But there were plenty of movies that were kind of playing it straight with that stuff all the time.
Well, what comes to mind is, I remember, because you remember the 80s was interesting because thanks to Damien, the Omen, the first one with Gregory Peck, it kind of did an avalanche of, how do I put it? It did an avalanche of the Antichrist movies.
Well, Exorcist
and one of the Antichrist movies, I mean, it has nothing to do with faith, but one of the Antichrist movies I went and saw in the theater, they had the guy who was questioning about his sexuality. He turned out to be the Antichrist, blah, blah, blah. He kisses the bully. The bully all of a sudden becomes a woman. That wouldn't fly today.
Sure.
That wouldn't fly today.
And
because he was all upset that he made him into a woman. That wouldn't fly today.
Sure. I mean, and I think that, there needs to be some understanding that as times change, media changes. And at the same time, understand that, this is what it's a product of its time and place, and you can enjoy it from that perspective. I mean, I think that that's what they do now with all of the Warner Brothers cartoons and different cartoons. They have something that on it as saying,
Disclaimer
"Hey,
or
this was
something.
some kind of disclaimer." And I think that that's helpful. Why don't get rid of the media, but explain, okay, at the time, for whatever reason, when somebody got an explosion in their face, they made them look like they were from Africa with braids, for whatever reason. I guess
Exactly.
that they thought it was funny, not really funny now, kind of silly and weird and just disjointed. And
And we thought it was funny too when we were kids when we saw it, and that's
I
what
think
people don't understand.
I think so.
Mhm.
I mean, but then we were obviously thoroughly conditioned, which is sad. We're thoroughly conditioned to see ourselves in a mocking light too. So
Well,
that
I won't say that, and I won't say it not because you're wrong or anything. I won't say because in my case, I just took it as a cartoon. I mean, one
sure,
of the best examples is the propaganda with Popeye and he fighting a Japanese submariner.
sure,
And of course, it's World War II. And of course, the Japanese are the bad guy. And I mean, the guy has yellow skin, he has big teeth, all exaggerations, the whole thing. And the whole time he's firing a torpedo, he's saying, I'm so sorry, again, playing off of that.
hmm
And I mean, there are a group of people who will be offended, but like we were saying just now about the dynamite, you take it in stride. You
hmm
know that's not you. You know that wasn't you,
hmm
you know.
but
And I
it's
mean, there's
go
I
on.
was going to say is I was going to say, and it was that time period. The thing is, we can't deny the history, negative or positive. We focus on the negative from the point of view of reparations or from the point of view, and I'm talking not just blacks, I'm talking about total, or wanting someone to say sorry. And we can't do that when our own government will scream about media, but our own government won't do that about and this getting into I know the political thing, but our own government won't do that about addressing when people of color
Historic inequality or anything like that.
have come up with like the computers, the hidden figures or other things like that, and they do it when they're dead.
Sure.
We got to stop doing that crap now.
Yeah,
We're
I think
okay. We're going to address it now that they're dead because I know that embarrasses the government. I know sometimes there are monies that needs to be exchanged, but in this time of talking about the divide in our government, that's one of the biggest things that would help is if they we're going to fix this
sure,
because we want to do that as a person and our own government want to do that. And where I'm going with it, we do that with media though.
sure.
We'll sit up there and we'll have something erased and it's like, was that really necessary? I mean,
Well, it's like,
you're
it's the problem is that we always swing from one side, one extreme to the other. We have all of these sort of racist images and everything else on one side, and then we want to tear all of that down and hide it on the other extreme. And it's like, no, I think the perfect thing to do, as much as I hate the Confederate statues, would be to put a ginormous
mall.
a ginormous excuse me, a ginormous plaque on it saying this guy was on the wrong side of history and here's why. That would be, I think, much better. But I do think that the subtle way that those Tex Avery, and I think it was mostly Tex Avery actually, but there was a little bit of it in Warner Brothers too, I think.
Yeah, it
Definitely,
wasn't
and
always Chuck
definitely
Jones.
it was
Chuck
mostly.
Jones was Chuck Jones was the dynamite. That was it. That's where it stopped. Was the
Yeah,
dynamite.
I think that mostly though it was Tex Avery and Disney. Disney was real bad with the crows and all of the things. Um, but
We're not going to talk about the crows.
yeah, right. But I think that what it did is that it put it into a lot of people's minds, including our generation, that our hue was a costume. And that's where you got the blackface stuff. And it was funny. It was like it's like drag with Monty Python or Milton Berle. I actually more than Monty Python because I think Monty Python they're just playing all the characters and being silly, whereas with Milton Berle and some older sort of vaudeville acts being in drag, it was like that was the point. Look how silly it is that this man is dressed up as a woman. Um,
You're
and
absolutely correct about that.
I think that
And
the. Oh, go ahead.
and one of the things that people also don't understand is we're not trying to downplay. That's the first mistake. They always think we're trying to downplay. We're not trying to downplay sacrifices that some people had to meet to be who they are.
Mm-hmm.
But we are, when you look at it, because I look at Bill Maher, I look at, as I always say, I'm an independent. You look at it from both sides. One of the biggest problems we have is everyone goes, I'm right. And
Sure.
ironically, that was a big thing about the new Doctor Who when he emerged, was
Mm-hmm.
that the toy maker had made a virus that made people think they're always right. In our
Sure.
society, that's basically it. I'm right. And we're not saying that you're wrong. What we're saying is that you're right, but if we're all going to get along, where does it stop?
Sure.
Because we hear about, the chronological attracted. Okay, pedophile, blah, blah, blah. But he wants the same rights as someone who's trans. And I'm like, okay, 8 billion people, there could be 1,000. Hell, there could be 1 million people who have that need.
Mm-hmm.
But we need to help them, but they need to ask for help. Yeah. I
What
mean,
the that people
the
who
chronological people, that's what I'm talking about.
oh, so yeah, the people that say that they're attracted to
Attracted to
children.
9-year-olds or whatever.
Well, yeah, you gotta. I think that you have to obviously. The problem with a lot of these things. I mean, this is getting way into the weeds because back to nerd stuff in a second. Just
Of
that,
course.
yeah, there are. I think that sometimes people will take a thing and try to say, well, this is like another thing, and it's not.
Oh yeah,
Trans
it's the same thing
issues
like
and
they would always say to have a
LGBTQ
black friend.
issues. Yeah,
You-
LGBTQ issues are absolutely, positively, 100% different from people who want to sleep with children. And
Oh, 100%.
unfortunately, there are people, bad faith actors, that want to combine those two, and they're not to be done. But back to the nerd thing. Um, I think that in addition to all that nerd stuff, been going to cons. And that brings us to the subject of what today's issue is, which is just the pros and cons of cons. Um, so, having gone to cons for a few decades, they have certainly changed from the insular, intimate situations of fanboys and girls who wanted to see their heroes meet actors and actresses in their properties to now what is arguably, I'm sure, a multi-million-dollar proposition. Um, I'm seeing people at cons. It used to be, you'd get to see, maybe Leonard Nimoy, or William Shatner, or George Takei, or you Jim Shooter, or Stan Lee, or Neil Adams. And now you're seeing people that may have been a secondary character in a one season show
That's one. Or you
and
might see
having
something
to
that has
pay an
nothing
arm
to
and a
do with
leg
that.
for it. So, I think that uh I think that that's one piece of it, and just the price of it. I didn't go to Fan Expo this last year, but I had a friend who went, and she was saying that they didn't even have panels. Like, it was just celebrity guests and just the merchandise hall, but there weren't any panels like, oh, it, 30th anniversary of such and such, and here are the artists and writers, and they're just doing a Q&A and talking in a room. She doesn't believe. Now, again, someone out there who did go to Fan Expo in Colorado, please correct me if I'm wrong, but panels used to be sort of the thing. Now,
Because the panels used to be, I mean, a good example was Rain of Fire. When
mhm,
Rain of Fire came out, it was the top in many ways still influenced because you always have the legacy product.
mhm,
It was the influence of dragons,
mhm,
of how dragons would be if they were real. And
mhm,
so a lot of the technology, a lot of the observations they were talking about, and where I'm going with it, they had a panel of Rain
mhm,
of Fire explaining that. And then about 5 years later, even though the movie didn't do good, it didn't do bad, but they went on to say how it still had influence. And I mean, I remember when they would have a panel about time travel, not knowing what they're talking about, but give you the theories of why it was possible and why it wasn't.
mm.
You know, and I
Well,
mean,
when you
that's what Geekdom was because to me, the 40 years ago, when I went, what was interesting to me is a few things. One, how the racial dynamics have changed,
Mm-hmm.
how the sexual dynamics have changed. And when I'm referring to sex, I'm not talking about sexuality. I'm talking about, first of all, it's 90% guys.
Sure.
And then if there were women, they were somehow not mainstreamly accepted.
Sure.
They were
I
either
think
mousy, tomboyish, or
I
of a
well,
different sex.
anybody who was not, it was all non-traditional paradigms. You know, if you were black, you weren't necessarily stereotypically black. If you were a woman, you weren't stereotypically feminine. Or if you were a guy, you weren't stereotypically macho, or all of those things. Um, yeah. And I think with all of that becoming mainstream, which is great because, you know, all of these people need to get paid. But I do think that there has been some sacrificing some of the qualities of these things for that mainstream acceptance. Because if you're going to have a con, especially Fan Expo, you're going to have a con without panels. I mean, it's got to be wrong. She has to be mistaken. There had to have been panels there. Because if it wasn't panels, that means it's literally just shopping and autographs, and that's it. And maybe seeing, I'm assuming there might be panels that were just talking to uh the actors that were in all of these properties. But you know, part of, I'm thankful that NDK, everyone out there in Colorado or the world, check out NDK, Nandescon, the anime festival convention that happens here at the Aurora Convention Center. They have panels. You know, they have panels. There's stuff that you can go do, and that isn't just shopping and getting autographs. Uh,
Well, a couple of things that people don't understand is, first off, I've said this to you before, they're hoping we die off. And what I'm talking about is people who went to cons in the 80s, the 70s, the 60s, when they first really were developed. And where I'm going with it is there are a lot of things that were free at the time because it was a new finance, a financial source.
mhm.
And now, like for instance, no one thinks about going to a hotel or convention center to be there, and they know you want food because you're going to be there long enough. And you're basically buying 2 packs of hot dogs for one hot dog, $5 for a dog. They don't see that as price gouging or charging you, $30 for 2 hour parking or whatever else. You know what I'm saying? I mean, we know they have to make their money. We know that we're taking up the hotel's time or space. We understand that. And we know that a lot of the guests, they have to make money. Some people, they did great things 20, 30, 40 years ago, and now they're living off of that fame. And we understand that because, they have nothing else as a source of income. We understand that. But is a good example is the Utah convention they had this weekend. Mel Gibson's autograph was $500, not like he needs it.
$500. I would, I'll be honest with you. I wouldn't probably take his autograph for free, but that's just me. So that's just me.
You
Well, that's
understand what? No.
yeah. Well, and that's to me that's ridiculous. Now I went to the Colorado Festival of Horror, and I had a great time. And
Mhm.
you know, I there were some actors and actresses that were there that they were charging a bit for I mean, it was $50, $40 for a picture, but they also would do a selfie, and they'd get it, and it was small enough that they'd talk to you and hang out, and it was great. I had a great time with that, and um I don't know.
That's what people don't understand.
I think there's a way that you can do it and not and give them their props, give them, $50, $40 for a signed autograph personalized picture plus a selfie. I think that's a pretty good deal. you know um I think the horror
I
people tend to be a bit more uh modest anyway.
Well, I think also is to me, I always had the one bill principle. What I mean is, if I had to pay $100, I can live with that. But when it starts being $200, $300, then I'm wondering what I'm paying for. you know.
Sure.
And I mean, like Dick Van Dyke, he was supposed to be at the Utah one. He didn't make it because he didn't make the Emmys. He said he's getting a little too old. He doesn't realize, he didn't realize before the commitment.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not holding that against him. We all can live with that.
Mm-hmm.
But we have someone that they did, they were the stormtrooper in New Hope, and you didn't even see their face. And, they don't even really tell you the stories because they really don't know. They were just in one thing, and they want to charge you $50. That's a little dishonest.
I think so.
I mean,
I
we're paying for the experience you have, but our experience should be we met you or something.
Well, and I had a lovely chat with Amy Steele and Adrienne King, the final girl from Friday the 13th Part 2 and the final girl from Friday the 13th Part 1. And they were one of the most pleasant celebrity experiences I had. I got them to autograph something for my son, who is a big fan. I'm a big fan too, but I'm just not an autograph person. I never really
Right,
have been.
right.
But they took a selfie with me, and we had a good talk, and they were just really really cool. And 40 bucks, $50, I think, for a picture plus a selfie plus a personalized picture, of course, with their autograph. I thought that's doable. That's not crazy. $100, that'd have been crazy. $200, $300, $500, that's crazy. I haven't enjoyed Mel Gibson, $500 worth of Mel Gibson. I just haven't. I absolutely have enjoyed $40, $50 of both of those actors, Adrienne King and Amy Steele. Absolutely. I probably saw Friday the 13th Part 1 and Part 2 way earlier than I should have. I saw
Right.
those when they came out, and what was I, 12?
Wow. Yeah,
I mean,
you saw
yeah, it
me.
was.
I
Well, I
didn't
had a
see the chance like 20, and I didn't have the desire to see them. They just didn't interest me.
here's how it happened for me. I had a babysitter, and the babysitter had, teenage kids. And I was a preteen, and
Right.
they wanted to go see movies. And so I ended up seeing Prom Night. I ended up seeing Friday the 13th, Part 1. I remember seeing I don't know, a bunch of different movies because of them. And I guess I'm fine. I mean, you do see a decapitation in Friday the 13th Part 1. Spoilers, I'm sure at this point, if you haven't seen Friday the 13th Part 1, I don't know what to tell you. But yeah, I mean, there's some stuff, and
So the thing that gets me about Friday the 13th is that two things. That was Kevin Bacon's first real movie,
yeah,
and then they have that girl in the Mickey Mouse crop top or belly shirt, and
sure.
she basically influenced a whole generation with that shirt from there on. Because that, before then, it was just supposed to be men in the gym.
Sure, sure. Well, and like I say, I mean, I definitely saw that pre-puberty, and I mean, that it probably was not the best idea to take me to that, but it was kind of like, well, these 16-year-olds are gonna, and I don't know if they, I mean, really, I don't know if they should have seen it actually, because uh, there may have been somebody that was 18. I think the oldest daughter of my babysitter might have been 17, 18, but
Yeah.
the youngest daughter was only a couple of years older than me, so she couldn't have been but 14. Seeing those movies. Um yeah. So I that could have gone real bad. I could have really been like, "Oh my god, they just killed that person." But for whatever reason, I was like, "Do. Oh, wow, that's crazy." Oh, I don't know how. But anyway, perfectly fine experience with both of them. I treasure those selfies that they took with me and the autographs. I thought it was great. But I think
And
that really, and I feel like Neil Adams pretty consistently when he would go to cons, you would just bring stuff up to him and he'd sign it. Most of the comic book people, they'll just sign stuff. They've never asked for a fee.
Exactly. And I remember, I don't remember his name. I know his name is, God, I keep forgetting his name, but he was in the Twilight Zone. He played Decker, in the Doomsday episode of Star Trek. And his last years, he was notorious for being a murder, she wrote. But to the point, I remember he was the first one to ever charge me. And this was really when they were starting to institutionalize the idea of charging. You understand? Because before then, they didn't charge. And he said, "This is how I eat." And once he said that, it became easy to understand. Because that's one of the things. They don't tell us, what they're doing. They just kind of put this change and we got to accept it. And that's one of the worst things about condom, as far as cons go, is they,
Condom.
yes, I know exactly what I said.
I con, convention-dom.
Oh, you don't like condom? I thought it was a good term there, right?
Yeah, I guess so. No, but it's true that when you realize now some of these people it's different, but some of these people it's like, oh, I know you have not done a lot, and you're meeting fandom that really, really digs you. Like, the two actresses that I just mentioned. I mean, they've been in stuff. They certainly have been in other movies. I don't think they've been in a lot of movies. You know, uh, they're not Felicia Day or Angelina Jolie or people that have 20, 30, 40, 50 things behind them. You know what I
Right.
mean? That I imagine maybe a dozen, and maybe some TV appearances here and there. So, but they go to these the horror convention and they meet people that really care about them, and
Exactly.
really appreciate what they did. And to me, you don't get, and at least in horror movies, you don't really get any better than hold on one second.
Mhm.
Sorry, they were just going to take the dog for a walk. But yeah, I think that you don't get better in horror movies than the final girl because she is sort of I mean, she is like the magical girl in anime or the shonen hero. They are the one that will survive, and I think that's yeah, I think they need to be appreciated for that.
Well,
Um,
yeah, especially one for Friday 13th Part One. I remember that she had a stalker and it changed her whole life. You know, it made her reconsider having children in there. You know what I mean?
what,
And
the
and
actress?
yes, and
Really?
they have a similar thing with the lady from the boys, the one who feeds Homelander.
Okay.
Some guy thought that she should be able to do that for real or something. It's
Huh.
like, you know, and of course we all hear about that, and it makes us fanboys look bad. I mean, it's like, come on, people. We do this to escape reality. We don't try to pollute it
Oh,
with our reality.
that makes me feel so sad because Adrienne King, I had a delightful probably 5-10 minute long conversation with her. She was great. She was very giving, very open hearted. So
Hmm.
that just sort of blows my mind that that happened to her.
Yeah, that's why she wasn't in part two. That is the reason why she wasn't in part two, except to be killed at the beginning.
Mhm.
That's exactly why.
Huh. Well, that's a shame. I hope she comes back for Colorado Festival of Horror next year because
Mm.
I'd love to talk to her again. I thought she was great. And but yeah, I feel like uh it is good to be among people that care about the work that you've done. They appreciate your acting, they appreciate your voice acting or what have you. But you gotta watch being, gouging. Um, I
Well,
know that I've seen Lou Ferrigno probably at every comic convention I've ever gone to. I mean, I
yeah,
definitely think he
again, because
goes
he
to
needs to be.
yeah, I think that he goes to quite a few of those. And, arguably I think that he there are some people that really don't like to be, they don't want that to be what they're associated with. I think that there's some snobs. There's some snobs in nerd culture for sure.
Oh, they're
But
different
I,
kinds.
but George Takei, I've seen him a bunch of times at a bunch of cons. I've seen Lou Ferrigno at a bunch of cons. Open, kind, friendly, and reasonable in terms of whatever they will charge. And I don't even think that they charge for autographs. So that makes me really feel like, oh, this person really is pretty cool. I've always had a pleasant time seeing George Takei and Lou Ferrigno at cons. But Mel Gibson, come on, bud. Come on.
Are you not a little biased because of his nice comment to his ex-girlfriend?
I'm not super down with his racist or anti-Semitic comments, no. But I also, before that, I'm like, I mean, I liked him in Mad Max. I mean, I suppose I mean, I, like everybody, liked the first Lethal Weapon. But
Oh, I love Lethal Weapon, but as far as Mad Max, it wasn't him. It was the dog in the car. I couldn't give a dang about him. I just liked the
yeah,
dog.
but I mean, I liked him in the Road Warrior. Road Warrior, he was
Yeah, again, I like the what? The
good.
dog in the car.
Fair, fair. I mean, but I liked those. That reminds me, I haven't even seen Furiosa yet.
I haven't neither.
Huh. Anna Taylor-Joy, the actress in that, she doesn't sound like she had a good time filming it, which has put me off from wanting to watch it partially.
Well, yeah, and again, why didn't she? As in, because that's one of the things about geekdom. Again, when we go to these cons, we have a new person at the table. Their name is Cancel. Their name is Cancel. We never had that at cons before. You know what I mean? When we were young,
What, people
with
that had
the
been
stars
part
that
of
happened,
being canceled?
cancel culture.
Mm-hmm.
We never had that at cons when we were young. We all heard about things. I mean, John Wayne was one of the biggest things we heard about when we were young. You know what I mean? As
Sure.
far as that didn't stop us from watching the westerns. We're just like, yeah, we're just not going to go up to him.
Well,
Or
you're alone on that one. I didn't watch anything that John Wayne's been in and will not. John
I,
Wayne was a hero to most, but he never meant, well, the rest of the Public Enemy line. Yeah, no, that he did prevent me from. I mean, I have to admit, I don't. I'm not fond of whatever they're sort of terming as cancel culture, but I'm into consequence. And if you say dumb, shitty things, I'm not going to watch your product. I don't necessarily need to make it wave a big flag on the
but see,
highway about how you're a terrible person. But I personally I'm going to enact my freedom to not watch whatever you're involved with, and that's fine.
but see, friend, by doing that, we sometimes hurt others.
With
Roscoe Brown, I forgot his name as far as middle name, but Roscoe Brown, the black guy,
mm-hmm.
always he was like he's one of three actors. They all spoke proper English. They sound British, and none of them were ever from England.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Jay Robinson and Jonathan Harris was the other one.
And who is this person now?
Roscoe Brown,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, he played the cook in the Cowboys. You know,
Okay.
and that's probably one of the favorite movies I have because first of all, he had such a great scene with this lady, a madam.
Mm-hmm.
He has a great scene because he knows that they're trying to hook up with the Cowboys, and they're
Sure.
like, yeah, we know,
Was
you're
this a
trying to
John?
take the
Was this a John Wayne vehicle?
yeah,
Huh.
John Wayne, uh, what was it, Bruce Dern, Laura Dern's father.
Huh.
It's the
Well.
only time John Wayne's ever been killed in the movie.
Hmm.
Only time he's ever been killed in the movie.
Well.
And what's interesting about it was he said it, and it's sadly true. And this is again what people don't think about. He
Mm-hmm.
told Bruce Wayne, you're going to be the most hated man in America when you take this part.
Sure.
And he didn't lie. After that, Dern didn't work the same for a good 10 years.
Well, that's weird. Well, here's my thing. If you're a shitty person saying shitty things, I'm not going to support your movie, not going to buy your thing. And if other people suffer for that, I'm sorry that you're in a movie with a shitty person. I, I'm not going to watch a movie to support the other people that are in a movie with John Wayne. So we will disagree on that one. I'm like, nah, I don't need that.
Okay,
There's
I accept
nothing.
that.
There's nothing. I'll just if I'm gonna watch True Grit, I'll watch the one with Jeff Bridges in it.
Jeff Bridges.
Yeah. So I don't know. I'm perfectly content not supporting John Wayne. But cons.
Wow.
What other things about cons? We only have a few more minutes to go. What other things are some? I mean, the pros of cons are obviously
The
seeing.
pros and cons are a few things. One, first of all, people don't understand con. What I mean is stuff, items, toys, whatever, is connection to a perfect or singular moment when you felt a symptom of joy.
So so experiencing fellowship with uh, the joy that these intellectual properties bring. That's a definite pro. A
Okay.
con, parking.
And well, yeah, that was going to be one, as I would say, parking, a con, the people who don't get it, who are there for whatever reason, and they want to basically rain on your parade because they don't agree with it.
Sure.
Uh,
Well, I would say that maybe mainstream people that are there that really don't get any of it, but are there because of a very tangential relationship with maybe the intellectual property or the things. But I mean, if they're bringing their kids, more power to them. You know,
I was thinking like newscasters sometimes. I was now that's not the same as when we were kids. When we were kids, that was just over the top.
sure,
Now you have some of the newscasters; they're just as gritty and dirty as we are as far as getting into it.
sure.
So, but
Uh,
the other con is, as far as negative, is
mhm.
the one that, as we just mentioned earlier, the one that takes it too far.
What do you mean?
No,
Like price
no, the one who thinks they're Jason, the one who really they have nothing else in their life. You know,
sure. Sure, the person that lives for the con. I think that's fair. I think, but I those folks don't typically affect me. I'll tell you what does affect me, deodorant. That is a con of the con. People wear deodorant. I think the next time if I'm gonna dress up at a con, I think the best thing to dress up as would be a speed stick and say with a big T-shirt that says "You need me."
actually, they had that once as one of the pictures. They had a girl with a sign: "Do not forget deodorant." She had this shriveled up face of, you stink. Yes.
Yeah, deodorant, it's perfectly fine. I know that some of us are mixed with our social skills. Just do the bare minimum, and even if you haven't taken a shower, do the
Yeah, get some
quick wipe
t-shirt.
down. Do the quick wipe down with a wet rag and put on some deodorant. It's like
Yeah.
so yes, that's a con. Pro,
Um,
I do think that you can find some deals on some comics or some merch. Um I wish I was richer because there are plenty of times at a con where someone paid a ton to get the table at the vendors area. They paid a ton for the vendors area and they're just not making enough money. You can just tell. They have something that is so niche that they're probably not going to make even the money back for you know paying for their table at the con. I wish I was a multimillionaire because I would just be like, here's $1,000. That way you at least don't have to worry about making the money
getting back home.
to get back home. Here you go.
Mhm.
And I strongly suggest that you out there in America, if you see somebody that's got a table and no one's going there, I mean, they probably would be insulted if you gave them $5.
Buy a cheap item.
But buy buy some cheap item, and talk them up because there's nothing worse. That is a con. There's nothing worse than seeing someone at a con where they have paid a table and they put their blood, sweat, and tears in their little keychain that they've made or some other knickknack or tchotchke, and no one comes to their table. Same with voice actors. There's some people that no one ever comes to their table. I always go out of my way to say, hey, I've always appreciated what you do. I hope that you hear that. I want you to know that. Thank you so much for what you've done. I mean, and it just brightens their day, and I mean it. But that is
Right.
that's a con that we can make into a pro.
And one of the things they can also do is food. And I
Yeah,
mean that you're dealing with 10,000 people in some cases. First of all, try to have a varied diet. If you're not going to let people bring in outside food, have a varied diet because you have people come in vegan, you have people come in diabetic. You get the idea.
gluten free, whatever. Yeah, I mean, that's the one sort of criticism I would have with the Colorado Festival of Horror is that their food options were pretty minimal, but they were close enough to a lot of other places, and they were open to you bringing stuff in. So that to me, if
And
you
that's the part we just said, bringing stuff in. Because if you're not going to do what we just said, then let us bring stuff in.
yeah, and I bring stuff in anyway, I don't care. So they allow you to have a backpack most of the time. So I'm sticking snacks in it. You're not getting me to pay for a $10 burrito. It's just not
Yeah,
happening.
I have nothing against the $10 burrito, but be a $10 burrito.
Yeah,
Don't be
don't be a
$10
dollar
burrito.
50 burrito in a $10 price point.
Exactly. I mean, because that's one of the things that drives me nuts. Because it's just like going to the airlines, $5 for a can of pop soda.
Well, and I think that the next con I would say is, keep the profits kind of mellow. I mean, obviously you got to make sure that all your talent is getting paid. Their flights, their hotel, or what have you is getting paid. Sure. Make sure that you're paying for the rental space. Of course. Make sure all of your I mean, most of the time these are volunteers, so they're doing it for free. So
Right.
that can't be the small cadre of people that are actually working for you, make sure that they're all paid. You don't need to make 10 times that cost. You could make 2 or 3, and I think that you could reasonably. I mean, I'm sure the Colorado Festival of Horror made money, and they did not charge a heck of a lot, and the volunteers and the staff were great. So you can still do it well. I like the smaller cons. I'll be honest with you, the bigger cons are just no longer my bag. I liked Colorado
Well,
Festival of
I don't
Horror. I
like the
like
bigger cons.
NDK. Huh?
I don't. I don't like the bigger cons. I like to go see the people. You know what I mean? But here's three things. When you have a pop culture con, it used to be a Comic Con.
Mm-hmm.
And you only have one comic book store of the local area to come there. There's a problem, guys.
Sure. You're
Okay.
charging too much for those tables, probably.
That's exactly it. And then the other problem I have is I don't like being groped like I'm at the airport. We
Sure.
know we have security. We know that, but you're not thinking the same way as like they'll think of like the Aurora shooting, where you had a lot of people who did, people who've been training their whole life to try to be some sort of superhero. They are not going to let that person run away.
Sure. I'm okay with it being affixed a little bit because I think, frankly, I'm super surprised nothing bad has happened at one of these, because a person could go to any of these cons and just mayhem. It would be terrible. And I'm hoping and praying and crossing all my fingers and toes that that never happens, because I think that is going to it'll kill the con industry completely.
Oh, it definitely would because we'll say, well, we don't need it anymore or whatever. I mean, this goes back to what I was saying about malls
Mm-hmm.
and movie theaters. I mean, both which they're trying to get rid of. What they don't
Yeah,
understand is that allows communication,
yeah, and I think
safe
that
communication.
that is. I'm just hoping that never happens. So far, knock on wood, it hasn't. But and
And
in
when it
today's
when it does, if it does, we just have to launch a serious media campaign about how this was an isolated incident. Because why I'm saying that they don't shut down schools, and we're not
sure.
saying it's good. You know what
Well,
I mean?
I tell you right now, if some crazy person comes in and tries to, do something to some of the voice talent or the actors or actresses, they're not gonna escape, because there's
Oh
just
no.
gonna be a ton of
Oh.
people grabbing them. I mean, one thing that I would say about folks that go to these is that I think that they tend towards the more selfless side of the spectrum. So, but that
Well,
sounds
not
like
just that. A lot of them have always wanted to be altruistic as far as being a hero,
sure,
even with being an anti-hero.
sure.
Sure.
So yeah, they wouldn't get out for sure. I think that it would be something. But that sounds like a good place to wrap it up. Those are some pros and cons of cons. Where can people find you, Terrance?
At drakestorm@gmail.com.
And they can find me at thatsoquantum@gmail.com. Yeah, we're gonna try to get a little bit more frequent, ladies and gentlemen. We were busy. There was a lot of stuff going on, job schedules and everything else. But stick with us. We do try to provide some thoughtful entertainment for you and some different perspectives. So, as we like to say around these parts, don't be a stranger.
Just be strange.
And hopefully we'll see you fairly soon.
Yep.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Take care.